Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chai Time Data Science Show. In this episode, it's really a privilege to be talking from someone on the other side of Kaggle, the CEO of Kaggle, Anthony Goldbloom. Anthony has a background in economics and has been working on Kaggle, working on the other side of Kaggle as the CEO and co-founder for almost over a decade now, which of course we talk all about in this interview. We talk about his journey as the co-founder of Kaggle and even Kaggle's journey, broadly speaking, over the past few years, how Kaggle has evolved, how their perspective, how the team's perspective on Kaggle and the team itself has evolved from the start until the point even after it got acquired by Google. This interview shares a lot of insights about the behind the scene work that goes into Kaggle while hosting a competition, broadly speaking, or even putting out a new course on Kaggle Learn, which also I'd highly recommend to the audience that you should definitely check out. We also discuss Kaggle's future plans and what's next and exciting for us as frequent Kagglers. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and it was really a privilege for me to have Anthony on the show. A quick note to the non-native English speaker audience: if you'd like to enable subtitles for the video of this interview, assuming you're watching it on YouTube, please do so. The subtitles are not auto-generated, those have been manually fixed, and I hope those will improve your watching experience. The written version of this interview or the blog post version will come out in a few days or in a few weeks from this release. You can find the link to the website where it will be posted if you want to read it later. For now, here's my interview with the CEO of Kaggle, Anthony Goldbloom. Please enjoy the show. Hello, Anthony. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's really a privilege for me to be talking to the CEO of the home of data science on the Chai Time Data Science Show.
Thanks for having me. As I mentioned to you, I'm an audience member, so it's cool to be on the show.
It's an honor to have you. I'm a fan of Kaggle, as you very well know, but unfortunately, I didn't get to witness the progress of Kaggle over the years. I was in high school, actually, not even in high school when it started to progress. Could you walk us through what led you to create this platform, and then maybe we can discuss how it progressed over the years?
Sure. I mean, my first job out of college was as a statistician. I'm Australian originally, and so I was working at the Australian Treasury and then the Reserve Bank of Australia. And I used to do things like forecast GDP, inflation, unemployment, problems that had relatively small data sets and also very messy data sets. Measures like GDP, it's not really clear. They're a composite measure. It's not really clear that there's a lot of signal and they're very hard to forecast. And I think I was first exposed to the idea. The idea Kaggle started just as machine learning competitions, it's not an idea that we invented. It has a long history. Probably made most prominent by initially the KDD Cups and then the Netflix Prize. And I had seen the KDD Cups, and I always thought that was a really nice way, to decide who gets to speak at a conference, right? So KDD was a prominent applied machine learning conference.
Yeah.
A lot of talks. Who spoke at the conference was decided in the traditional way, where you would submit a, your working paper or your paper, and it was either accepted or not. But they always reserved some number of slots at the conference for those who had done well in whatever the competition they ran for the year was. And I always like that because it's an objective way to decide. It gives people a chance who haven't published in the usual places and in the usual ways, and it gives them a chance to share their ideas. And I found that attractive, and it was something that I wanted to bring to make a concept that wasn't just used for the KDD Cup, but was used more broadly, and that was the motivation behind. That was sort of where the initial spark behind Kaggle came from.
Got it. I also want to point out, when the Kaggle had started, machine learning wasn't the so big thing. AlexNet didn't come out at the time. Were other platforms very prominent at that time?
There were a couple. So, firstly, a lot of the KDD Cups were hosted on just like one-off websites. There was a Polish website called tunedit.com.
Okay.
I actually don't know whether they still exist or not. I think it was attached to a university, maybe the University of Warsaw or a Polish university. That was the only platform that I was aware of that repeatedly hosted competitions. But it didn't seem to be under very active development. It seemed to be more of a side project of the researchers who maintained it. And it's certainly the case. Kaggle's timing was very, very lucky. As you say, it was 2 years before AlexNet. That being said, machine learning was still capable of powerful things. When Kaggle first started, the word data, while machine learning wasn't nearly as prominent as it is today, data science as a field was sort of becoming data science as a word and as a field was starting to bubble up as becoming a little bit more prominent. And one of the exciting things that Kaggle did is it brought together people from many different backgrounds who are actually trying to achieve fairly similar things. So you had people who were bioinformaticians, you had statisticians, you had econometricians, you had data miners. All these people had different job titles, but were trying to achieve similar things. And it was interesting because in the early days of Kaggle, they all had their pet techniques, support vector machines, logistic regression, linear regression, or generalized linear modeling more generally, self-organizing maps. There's many very different techniques. And I'd say probably Kaggle's first achievement was making it very clear what worked and what didn't work. And in the very, very early days of Kaggle, the thing that dominated was the combination of clever feature engineering and random forest. And so it's super interesting. If you look at the very early competitions, people tried all sorts of things. And after one or two competitions, it became very clear very quickly that random forest was the way to go. And so I'm proud of that contribution, that we went from no one really having a very clear sense for what worked and what didn't, to helping all these people in all these different fields have a good sense for what sort of techniques they should focus their attention on.
Did you anticipate it getting to this stage? Now that you mentioned that people of different background are coming together, did you expect that to happen? Has it surpassed your vision yet, or has that happened already?
It's certainly the case that Kaggle is a lot bigger than I ever imagined it would be. My early goals were, I wasn't really enjoying my job as a statistician or an econometrician. I felt like I was forecasting something that was inherently unforecastable. And so I thought that this website would be really, really fun thing to work on. And I was hoping that it could support me. And that was the initial goal. And I think with every level of success, you become more ambitious. It's like the human condition. And so, when it reached that level of success, then there was another target and another target and another target. And there's always another target, right? We're a species who are never really completely satisfied, right?
It's definitely for our better that you're not satisfied, so Kaggle keeps getting better. Did you always have the mindset of being a founder, so to speak? Were you always interested in doing a startup, or did this eventually turn into a full-time job?
It's interesting. I was probably not super exposed to Silicon Valley startup culture.
Mhm.
So it's not like I had this long-term vision that I was going to be an entrepreneur um, or a founder. I think that it's certainly the case, though, that um, I definitely had those sort of instincts during high school. I had a small business videoing and editing um, bar and bat mitzvahs
Okay.
in my hometown. And then during college, I built a little company that um, made basically MP3 players for retailers. So the idea
Wow.
was I just used to buy very, very cheap secondhand computers, install a very slim down version of Linux on them, and turn them into MP3 players. I thought it was
Interesting.
crazy that a lot of stores were still using cassettes. When the iPod came out, you could have 10,000 songs or whatever it was in your pocket. Um, so I was kind of always tinkering around with these things. I also, although I studied statistics, econometrics at college, um, I had a programming job in college, which I absolutely loved.
Okay.
And so I don't know, is I probably had the tendencies without, and maybe had I been born in the Bay Area, I might have gone straight to being a startup founder. It took me a little bit longer being in Melbourne, Australia, where I really wasn't surrounded by that culture.
Got it. Coming to your current day, what does a day in your life currently look like? Do you still get to do sailing, or are you continuously working with the team, having chai with the grandmaster sometimes?
So my day to day at work, it's a lot different than it was. Uh, my day to day, yeah, I don't know. It's changed a lot over the last I don't know 10 years. And initially, um, I coded the website. I did the data science behind the competitions. I tried to sell the competitions to customers. Trying to do a lot of it myself, and then over time, as the team has grown. Ben Hamner owns product and engineering, and Julia and Will and the team own competitions, and so the things that I used to do are now handled by people who are much, much more capable of doing them at a much higher level. I remember the early people complain about leakage now. You should see the competitions that I set up. They had horrible problems with them. Uh, um, uh, and so a lot of the things I tend to focus on are um, I guess like areas that are newer and we're trying to spin up. So one of the big questions for us at the moment is how what should the interaction be with the rest of Google? One thing you might have noticed is the proportion of competitions that we run from other Google teams is much higher. So that's a very obvious place for us to integrate with other Google teams. But what are other areas where Kaggle should be looking to integrate more with Google? I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities. Google is a very, very strong AI and machine learning company, and so there's a lot of AI and machine learning happening around Google. What are the kinds of areas that are a good match for, what are the kinds of ways we can collaborate with other Google teams that, good for Google and good for the community. And so that's an area where I'm spending some amount of time now.
Got it. So, like you were talking, you still responsible for the vision of the company. Can you speak to how you've observed the vision change over the years, and especially since the acquisition by Google, because you remain the CEO even after Kaggle got acquired?
Yeah, I'd actually say that a bigger turning point for Kaggle was before the acquisition, um, with the launch of Kaggle kernels.
Okay.
This was in 2015, and it was really the first time we moved from being really from a community-focused standpoint, primarily focused on machine learning competitions to starting to expand beyond. And the idea, I think there are a bunch of people involved, but Ben Hamner, noticed that Docker was coming up as a really powerful, containerization, and Docker specifically was starting to emerge, and sort of spotted the idea that you could more easily and portably host, reproducible data science environments. And so that's where the idea, and we noticed people trying to share a lot of code on the forums. And so that was sort of, I think, our first big move. That was really a very big move for us, because it ended up moving us from just machine learning competitions to, I think of Kaggle as actually a fair bit broader than that now, and being a more broad-based community for machine learning. We have competitions, but we have, Kaggle kernels, which we're actually in the process of rebranding, Kaggle notebooks, and we have the data sets. And actually, just a stat for you, I think it's somewhere in the order of 5 or 6 times as many data sets are downloaded from our Datasets platform than our competitions platform today. So, I really, although many of our most intensely active users come through the competitions platform, we have a huge number of users who are not touching competitions, but rather are using Kaggle in other areas. Either we have almost 1 million people a month viewing notebooks that were authored on Kaggle, which is a large number. And so to put that in context, that's 1 million people coming who don't want to start their projects with a blinking cursor, but wanting to see how other people have approached similar problems to the one they're tackling. And then we have many, many hundreds of thousands of people downloading data sets from Kaggle on a monthly basis. And these are people who are using Kaggle. We now have a very, very large data set repository with 25,000 data sets, and growing quickly. And so these are people who, when they're searching for external data sets, find Kaggle a very useful starting point for looking for those data sets. So I'd say that's probably the biggest. The launch of the competition, the kernels, and the launch of datasets are really the 2 biggest changes that have happened to Kaggle, and they happened in 2015 and 2016. The Google acquisition was 2017, so it came after the launch of those 2 products.
Can you speak to datasets? Because at the time of recording, datasets was introduced just 2-3 months ago. What led you to adding it as an independent tier? People can actually go out and become grandmasters even in that tier if they want to.
Yeah, well, actually, datasets, we first posted public datasets on Kaggle in August of 2016. And the way we did it was really, really fairly subtle. We just put them in the competition listing. And it's like, hey, you can compete in competitions, but we've also got these 6 data sets for those who just want to play around and write notebooks or kernels on data sets. One data set in particular got a lot of attention. Ben put up Hillary Clinton's emails. And so a lot of people, this was around the time of the controversy during the election around Hillary Clinton storing emails on a private server, and those emails, I forget, through some FOI request, were released publicly. And so a lot of people were doing NLP, et cetera, on those emails. And that demonstrated to us that data sets were, a very powerful direction for us, and a good place for us to invest. And I think it was in January of 2017 that datasets became its own tab on the top of the site. So datasets have been there for a while, and I remember the goal initially was, can we get 10 datasets a month? And I think we're probably up to 10 datasets an hour now. I'm not quite sure on what the stats are, but we certainly get a large number of datasets. Datasets as a progression, as a part of progression, that came in maybe a month or so ago. And the motivation behind that is, one thing that Kaggle has always been accused of is not being a very well-rounded data science credential. Competitions test for a certain skill set, but there's a lot of other skill sets involved in doing data science well. And in over time, we've elevated notebooks and then discussion into being part of the progression system. And the latest is Datasets, and I think they each of them play a bit of a different role. So competitions is fairly obvious. It's a very nice metric for figuring out who's good at training very accurate machine learning models. Discussion I look at as, and discussion and notebooks get a lot of controversy, but I think on the whole, they're really wonderful. Yes, there's a little bit of abuse, but I think the level of abuse is relatively under control. And they provide more value than they do, suffer from abuse. Discussion in particular, I think is very valuable on the whole. If you look at the most upvoted or the top ranked discussion people in the discussion ranking, they're some of the most admired Kagglers, right? And in order to get a good discussion ranking, you have to be technically strong to say things that are insightful. You also have to be helpful and a clear communicator. And I think a lot of what it takes to be a good data scientist, machine learner, like those are very nice attributes to have. Very often notebooks require, in order to get a lot of attention and upvotes, they require you to write clean code. That's not the case for for competition winning solutions. They don't have to be clean code, right? They just have to be accurate. So notebooks test that. And then a huge part of being an effective data scientist, machine learner, is putting data sets together. And so in adding that as a progression step, the goal is to create a more well-rounded profile for data scientists, and also let data scientists who are strong at different parts of the process of being a good data scientist sort of show their abilities in a different area.
I think it also speaks to the fact that every data scientist is somewhat working on a different task. It's not a well-defined profile as of now. What's your stand on the debate that constantly at least comes up on Twitter, that Kaggle is not real data science? And I have to say, it's not usually from Kaggles, people who haven't been on the platform. Do you think there are some aspects that are yet to be improved, or what's your stand on that question?
I think there's some validity to the statement for sure. If you think about what it takes to tackle a data science or machine learning problem, you have to start off by translating a business problem into a machine learning problem. Then you've got to actually solve the machine learning problem. Then you've got to productionize it, and then you've got to monitor, deploy, and after you've deployed, you've got to monitor the model in production and make sure it's continuing to perform well. My view is that Kaggle is weakest on the last bit, the deployment and model monitoring. We also get a lot of people often say, we're not so good in the problem setup because you don't get the experience of setting up your own problem and mapping a business problem onto a machine learning problem. I actually push back on that a bit, because I think one thing that Kaggle is very useful for is giving if you compete in many Kaggle competitions, for example, we've got this new thing called dataset tasks, which kind of define tasks on datasets. One thing they do is they are examples of places where people have mapped business problems onto machine learning problems. And so if you see many what it looks like to have mapped a business problem into a machine learning problem many times, it means you're much more well prepared for when it's your turn to do it. So I actually think we are somewhat useful there. The place, and this comes from Vladimir Igolevich, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, one of our grandmasters who works at Lyft. He tells a story of where Kaggle has been very useful for him. What he has found is that he is much faster than people who don't compete on Kaggle at getting to a good answer. So he talks about a problem Lyft had been grappling with for quite some months, and these are very well credentialed people. He took the problem home over the weekend and had a really good solution by the end of the weekend, and that sort of that that was a useful contribution, he was able to make it lift, and that's what Kaggle trains you for. At least Kaggle competitions, I should say, trains you for. It trains you for picking up a data set, getting familiar with it very quickly, and getting to a good answer very quickly. And so that's, if you look at the skills, I think we're weakest, just to summarize my answer, I think we're weakest in helping people learn about model deployment and model monitoring. And I think we're strongest in helping people get a good feel for when they get a new problem, how to get to a good answer very quickly. And I think that's it's not everything, but I do think it's a very useful skill.
I'd also like to say that there's no other platform that offers this broad array of everything, where you can even go and learn on Kaggle Learn, then go ahead and start with starter competitions, eventually work your way to featured competitions, as they were called initially. Can you speak to Kaggle Learn? How did that idea come into play, and what are your next plans with it?
Yeah, actually, before I do, one more comment. While model deployment and monitoring is an area where we don't have a lot, we are hoping we are trying to fill in gaps over time, right? And so Kaggle Learn is a fabulous opportunity for us to educate people on, users on deploying and monitoring models. So it's not something I'm committing to us doing, but it's certainly something we speak about. So it's a gap we're aware of, and it's a gap we would like to fill. Coming back to your question on the origins of Kaggle Learn, really it was very opportunistic. Dan Becker, who was a Kaggle master, I don't think he was ever a Kaggle grandmaster. I forget, but he had worked.
It might have been during the time when grandmaster wasn't a tier.
Yeah, which is kind of unfair, right? In any case, Dan Becker worked for Kaggle. I'm forgetting exactly when, and then he left to work at Galvanize, helping with their, and Data Robot, and both those companies helping with their data science education curriculum and efforts. And then he ended up, we started chatting to Dan again, maybe a few months after we joined Google, one of the reasons we lost Dan was he was very interested in data science education, and being at Google, we were better able to fund something Kaggle Learn or something focused on data science education. So Kaggle Learn really was completely, Dan set the vision for it, and came up with the idea that ultra short form data science education, where the goal really wasn't to teach you absolutely all the theory, but rather just to give you enough to know what code to write so that you can go off and do your own projects on Kaggle. So the idea is just to get people from 0 to 1, and just enough to start tinkering yourself, and that was and is the goal with Kaggle Learn. And now we have Alexis is leading that effort, and so I think
Matt
there's a lot
as well has joined the team. I think it's been a while since he's joined.
No, Matt's not with us now, so it's Alexis is. Alexis owns it, and I think she's got very exciting things planned for 2020.
I'd also like to mention to the audience, there are some workshops that keep happening. I think we can follow those through the newsletter and through the YouTube channel, the workshop efforts, and even the paper reading sessions.
Yeah, so the workshops, the idea behind the workshops, just to explain, is Kaggle Learn courses involve a lot of work. We set exercises and have checking code, and they're quite heavy to produce. And we wanted a way to produce edu content in a much lighter way. And so every now and then we create these workshops, and the idea is they're more of an ad hoc, spur of the moment kind of thing, and they don't have all the infrastructure requirements that a Kaggle Learn course has. With Kaggle Learn, we've added functionality more recently, like completion certificates, progress tracking, and things that have a much heavier infrastructure emphasis. And so the workshops are a good way to be able to push things out in a lighter weight way, if there's a cool topic that somebody wants to run a workshop on.
Okay. Now, before we talk about Kaggle's community, I'd like to talk about the team behind all of this community. I think it's less than 100 at this moment. Could you speak to the team? How did
Yeah,
you?
we're about 50, and actually, a fun fact: we were always much smaller than people ever thought. When we were acquired, we were only 17 people.
Wow.
I was always really proud of that we were able to get a lot done as a really small team. One really nice thing about joining Google is that we have more resources, and just the caliber of Google engineers is very strong. And so scaling our engineering team, one of the bottlenecks had always been scaling the engineering team at the caliber we wanted was very difficult. The Bay Area is a hard place to recruit engineers, and Google is exceptionally good at it. And so we've been able to grow the team. The maybe one of the things Kaggle did very early on, which had its pros and cons, was we really only hired out of the community, or primarily hired out of the community. But the problem was that we didn't only need people doing data science, right? We had data scientists doing marketing, data scientists doing competition sales, and so on and so forth.
Education, even.
Yeah. I mean, education, I think, is more closely lines up with what some data scientists want to be doing and have the skills to be doing. But in other cases, maybe that's not such a good fit. And I think one of the things that has changed over the years is it sounds like an obvious thing to do, but we have people who are specialists in their various areas, running their various areas. We have somebody running marketing. We have somebody who is a marketing person. We have somebody running a developer advocacy who is a developer advocacy person, and so forth. So that's a big change in the way the team runs, and the way we're organized is. We have all of product and engineering reporting into Ben, and that's broken up into competitions engineering, datasets engineering, notebooks engineering, community engineering, which is all the glue that sticks things, keeps things together, and then we have outside of that we have marketing, DA, Kaggle Learn. Competitions data science, and competitions program management, and program management is the actual signing up of competition customers. So that's a rough outline of the team, and I think it's about 35 in engineering and around 15 in other functions.
Okay. You just outlined all of the areas of Kaggle. Do you have any one area that you think is underrated right now that you wish had more recognition, or do you think it's well recognized all across?
I mean, one of the things that I think has the most potential is data sets. I fundamentally believe there should be a place in the world. Sorry, unrealized potential is data sets. I fundamentally believe that there should be one place that you go to find public data. And there's been many companies and projects that have attempted to build this. I think that Kaggle's Datasets platform is further than anyone has ever gotten before, but that's not very far. We're a long way from being so compelling that we're the first place you go to find data sets. But maybe to illustrate this point, if you want to find a public data set, your best bet currently is a Google search, right? And that is not a wonderful experience. And I think there is an opportunity to create a dramatically better experience. But I got to tell you, I'm pretty excited. Like, there's no part of Kaggle that I'm not excited for. So let's take notebooks, for instance. The dream with notebooks is that nobody ever wants to start a project with a blinking cursor. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have an example of how you approach just about any data set or use case that you could ever want to approach, right? So that any project you're ever looking at on any kind of data set, the first thing you want to do is just do a very quick quote-unquote literature review on how other people have approached that problem, so that you're not starting from scratch. With competitions, machine learning, we have a very powerful functionality now in being able to run competitions in notebooks. And so that gives us way better support for things like time series, which have always been hard to do. I would love for us to, you can imagine some future, and this is not something sort of actively being worked on, but some future where we have like an evergreen stock market prediction competition, an evergreen weather forecasting competition. You might have noticed we just launched this Connect X competition. So
Yes.
this is our first step into things like agent-based reinforcement learning style competitions. We launched a GAN competition last year. And so as AI, machine learning and AI move into these, well, really AI moves into these new areas, I think it's very important that competitions can take Kaggle into these new areas as well. And so I think there's a huge future there. And then with Kaggle Learn, obviously there's a lot of exciting areas. There's GANs and reinforcement learning and some of the developments in natural language processing. And so Kaggle Learn, giving people an on-ramp, a very, very, very quick on-ramp to all these exciting new areas of machine learning is, we've got to run fast in order just to stay up with where AI and machine learning is. But we really want Kaggle Learn to be, if you want if you want something that just gets you from zero to, okay, I know what code to write, we want Kaggle Learn to be that place.
Okay. Do you have any favorite moments from the community where it like you had any aha moments from the community or any wow moments from the members of the community?
Yeah, I'd probably divide them into two.
Okay.
One is I always like the kind of touching moments. Like I remember a forum thread, for instance, where CPMP wrote a tribute to Chris. You probably know who Chris is, DOT. And I just thought it was a really nice moment. The two of the great, one of the really great Kagglers, the most admired Kagglers, paying a tribute to another of the most admired Kagglers.
Even though they are competitors on the same tier.
Yeah, exactly. So that for me, I don't know, that for me was like a best of Kaggle moment. And those sort of interactions I find really nice. I also really enjoy the Kaggle Days conferences because I get to meet a lot of I see the names and the aliases, and it's really nice to get to know the people and their backstories, and to the extent that Kaggle's had an impact on their lives and careers. That's always very nice to hear. From a maybe less touchy-feely moments of pride, I'd say I'm proud whenever Kaggle has a role. I don't think that Kaggle is a place where, well, I know it's not a place where it's rarely a place where invention happens, but it's a place where invention spreads. And so, if you think about, you can read lots and lots of papers, and it's very hard to keep up. Lots of papers these days, very hard to keep up with and every paper says, my method, I benchmarked against these 6 other techniques, and this is the best. And I'm really proud of the way Kaggle has helped sort out what really pragmatically works. I mentioned earlier that random forest quickly came to prominence on Kaggle, and it sort of cleared up that it was the best way to tackle most machine learning problems. And then in 2012, we actually had Jeff Hinton and George Dahl win a competition same year as AlexNet using neural networks. And then the competition immediately after, another of Hinton's grad students, Vlad Min, won that competition using neural networks, and that sort of helped spark the interest in neural networks. In 2013, people started playing with GPUs, particularly when Theano was released, and so we helped spread the power of GPUs more broadly as a way to train neural networks. In 2014, XGBoost took over from Random Forest, and so it became, on image recognition, it was obviously neural networks. On structured data, it was XGBoost. And then at that time, natural language processing, it was sometimes neural networks. and sometimes that has obviously changed, but it was sometimes neural networks and sometimes old style information retrieval approaches with XGBoost. 2016, there was a medical imaging competition that was won by UNets, which are now become the standard way of doing segmentation. So those are the things. And UNets, I think, were originally published at a medical imaging conference. So I think we had played a nice role in helping them spread to the broader machine learning community, and so now they're used for masking for autonomous vehicle use cases and so forth. So yeah, I'm proudest of the role we've had. I'm really proud of the role we've had in helping good ideas spread. And then more recently, giving more access to data sets, allowing people not to have to start with a blinking cursor. And also the impact we've had on people's careers. I think a lot of people will tell you that Kaggle has had a meaningful impact on their careers, and that's something of also that's very tangible that I'm proud of. So, yeah, I guess a lot of high moments for sure.
I can at least say that a major portion, at least, or almost all of the little things that I have learned of data science are from Kaggle. I think many people miss out on the point that Kaggle Learn is not just the point where you get to learn, but also the fact that you get to apply something. Just reading a paper is not good enough. You get to apply that to a competition. Coming to the tiers, so when you introduced the Grandmaster tier, did you expect that to take off into a direction that the Grandmasters get recognized as the heroes of the field by default? And if you have any plans of reintroducing another tier, maybe the April troll from earlier, the April Fool's troll from earlier.
Yeah, I don't. With tiers, the person behind it is Miles O'Neill, who runs our design team, and we're very lucky because Miles, as it happens, has a background in designing board games, and so
okay.
It's perhaps we were very lucky to have somebody who happens to have that background, who was sort of well positioned to design the progression system. I think the week the progression system launched, it was maybe one of the more unpleasant and stressful weeks he's had, just because it's a very hard thing to launch. That there's often the kind of thing that takes a while to figure out whether it's going to have a positive impact or not. And yep. And I think there were a lot of I think the first progression system, maybe I don't even remember. Maybe I designed it. Maybe I didn't. I forget how it was designed. It was not terribly well thought out, and Miles put a lot of thought into the updated progression system, and I think we're very lucky to have somebody like Miles design it, and it certainly has had a really nice impact on the field. It was interesting when we launched Datasets progression. It was as a tier, it was dramatically less controversial. And not to say it wasn't controversial, but some of the earlier changes we had made were a lot more controversial. Definitely a lot. We're sensitive and disturbed like many others because Kaggle credentials have become pretty well known and well regarded. We have a responsibility to try and make sure we preserve their integrity. And so issues like plagiarism, of course, are problematic. And not saying we're perfect, but we certainly do our best to keep those sort of things, keep the tiers and the rankings and the credential as pure and as meaningful as we possibly can, since it has become an important part of data science machine learning infrastructure.
Can you speak to any further actions that the team is looking into to reduce plagiarism and even cheating in the competitions? Very few, but quite a few instances have come up. Any steps you are taking as from the team?
Yeah, I mean, what we've got for plagiarism, particularly, we've got a couple of posts that we put out with guidelines of what's acceptable and what isn't, and then we have report functionality, and we go through the threads that are reported, and we sort of cross-reference those against the guidelines that we've posted. There are definitely ways that are within our guidelines that people are still able to, I don't know if abuse the system is quite the right word, but get high rankings in ways that are maybe less pure than we would like. But on the whole, if I've mentioned this before, I think discussion is probably our most controversial tier. When I go down and I scan the list of the top 10, it really rings true as a very strong top 10 list and people that really are admired. And you expand that out to the top 100, and that holds true to a bit of a lesser extent, but it's still largely a case. Like if you look at the top 100, I'd say 95 would be people that are very, very, very widely admired in the community. And so while the instances where somebody has gotten a high rating in a way that or ranking in a way that people look at as a little bit grey exist, they're small enough that that we think that the system as a whole is doing a good job. And to be honest, while the ideal might be 0, I think it's just not possible. So I think while not perfect, I think we're overall decently happy with the or we feel like we're dealing with the importance of our credentials in a responsible way.
So this question is from Russ Wolfinger from the AMA. What is the most difficult competition controversy that you have encountered, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, the most difficult, I think there are 2 that come to mind, but the one that is definitely top of mind, I think it is still the most upvoted discussion post, is related to the TSA competition we ran in 2017 from memory. We ran a competition with TSA. It had a $1 million prize, and the idea was to figure out, as somebody goes through, TSA is the US airport security, as someone goes through a scanner, you go like this at airport security. As someone goes through a scanner, can you detect whether or not they have a threat object on them? Was the idea of the competition. The controversy was that because it was being run by a US national security agency, they could not pay prize money to any winner that wasn't in the US. We negotiated pretty hard. Originally, the idea was that they weren't going to allow anyone from not in the US to participate, and I think we really struggled with that concept. Kaggle is supposed to be global, and we want to give lots of people opportunities. Then we faced a tough decision around whether or not to host once that got their legal team was able to, and it's not like they're doing this out of a place of wanting to shut out part of the community or anything like that. It's they're bound by US regulation, right? I think their legal team found a way where it was possible to allow people from outside the US to participate, but not to win prize money. So Kaggle faced a really tough decision on whether or not we still hosted the prize. And we decided to host the prize, even though it meant that a good portion of, the majority of the community were not eligible for prize money, which is clearly a crappy situation. The reason we decided to do it, and I still think it's, even with the community pushback, I think it was the right decision, was because we figured this competition existing and this data set being out in the world was better than it not being out in the world. And so that's why we decided it was better to host it than to not. Maybe given our time again, we might have looked at doing something like no prize money rather than, maybe that's the mistake here, was perhaps we should have said, look, we're better off with 0 prize money than $1 million only payable to people in the US. I'm not certain, but that could have been the mistake. on our end.
Coming to the other point of this conversation, can you tell us about any favorite competitions of yours, or maybe any favorite few, and what roadmap are you looking at for the future of competition? We already have, like you mentioned, GAN competitions, agent-based competitions, and even analytics-style competitions coming up.
Yeah. So favorites. I guess there's a few ways to.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, probably the ones that are most rewarding are ones where I feel like I've been involved in a very large breakthrough. So, the competition we ran with Merck around taking chemical compounds and predicting which ones would be toxic and which ones wouldn't, that Jeff Hinton won, um, is obviously a bit of a high point. It's an important moment in machine learning. Actually, Kaggle and that competition was on the front page of the New York Times as part of an article about the deep learning revolution, and so that was pretty exciting for sure. We ran, actually even before that, in 2011, a competition with the Hewlett Foundation around trying to take high school essays and grading them using an algorithm. And when we first looked at the problem, we thought, oh, there's no way that an essay can grade a high school essay. An algorithm can grade a high school essay. It actually turned out that the winning algorithms were pretty accurate, which was a big surprise. I think, if I remember correctly, Will Sikorsky, who now runs the competition's data science team, finished in the top 3 in that competition. So it also brought us a bit closer to Will, which is, and he's been with Kaggle since 2012. So that's been a really nice, that was a nice thing that came out of that competition as well. Let's see. Yeah, I mentioned the competition that led to UNet. So this is UNet spreading. So this is a competition to take MRIs and I think it was MRIs, yeah, and measure ejection fraction, which is was a way to measure heart failure. Actually, the diabetic retinopathy competition, I think we ran in 2014 or 15 with the Californian Healthcare Foundation, was one of the first times that medical imaging, which has become a hot field, had been applied to AI, and it was very strong results. So I think I get a lot of pleasure out of the ones that have helped bring about some of the changes in the industry. And then more recently, I had a lot of fun. I was competing in a competition run by Recursion Pharmaceuticals to figure out which siRNA was injected. Sorry, which siRNA was injected into a cell.
I think Boyan found you on the leaderboard, and he did mention this on Twitter.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun. It was a bit of a rough period because, I'd be at work all day and I come home and it's like, oh, just one more submission. Oh, one more idea. And so it was like I wasn't sleeping very much, and I was constantly thinking about, oh, how do I improve my submission? I competed in that competition because I was kind of really curious to see how well AutoML. I'm very curious about one direction I'm excited about or curious about for machine learning is the direction of these automated machine learning tools. A lot of time is spent tuning, putting together architectures and tuning learning rates and so on and so forth. I was kind of curious, how far are we from the point where some of this stuff can be automated? And so it's both a cool chance to compete in a competition and try out a new technology. So I really enjoyed that one.
Was this the first competition that you competed in, or?
Yes, sort of.
Okay.
I've competed in, actually we haven't done this in forever, but maybe in 2011, 2012, 2013, we used to run these one day 24-hour hackathons, and I used to compete in those. Actually, I remember we did one of these 24-hour hackathons, and I think this was before Will joined Kaggle. I said to him, oh, hey, do you want to team up? And his answer was along the lines of, I'm not teaming up with anyone as hopeless as you. So that made me very determined to beat him, which of course I did not do.
Can you share a bit of behind the scenes on what goes into organizing a competition? We have guides of how to compete. I'm a bad sample of having competed in a very few number of competitions, but what sorts of legal aspects, all sorts of different things I believe would come into play while organizing one.
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a high level, but maybe in a future episode you want to have Will or Julia or someone from that team. They'll give you the complete inside out of
Okay.
how competitions are run. But we at this point, Kaggle has a fairly large pipeline of interest for competitions. So whereas in the past we used to reach out to companies and try and encourage them to run competitions, that's not really something we need to do now. We're decently well known, and so we get a lot of requests. We get a request from a combination of teams at Google and obviously the outside world as well. Ideally, as we launch competitions, and this is hard to do, the first thing we try and do is screen for is this likely to be, do they have, is there enough data? Is the data labeled? Is it likely to have signal? And so on and so forth. So there's some amount of pre-screening. This is done by Julia's team, which is the PGM team, and so
Okay.
they'll do a first screening. If it looks promising, then we'll ask for a sample of data, and then someone on Will's data science team will take a look at the data, and then we'll often do several iterations with the company posting the problem or the team posting the problem to get it into a shape where it's a good competition. A lot of the things we will do is we'll look for, I think this is something we're getting better and better at, detecting leakage. The team is very experienced at putting competitions up, and so have a pretty good sense for where the vulnerability to leakage might be. I know it might seem like there's a lot of leakage in competitions. I think you'll find that there's much less today than there was, say, 12 to 18 months ago. The team's really put a lot of emphasis on it, and has got a really, really good sense for like the number of instances of leakage that get detected before a competition goes out is really high. So even if you see it slip through every now and then, it's nothing compared with what was originally in the data set. For sure. And so that's a big emphasis and a big thing that the competition team does, and it's a very important function of the competition data science team, because even if a company is experienced or a team is experienced at tackling a data science problem, they're not trying to attack their own problem in a way that Kaggle users are, and so it's making sure that the competition is not attackable is a big priority. I remember, Wendy from our team often gives she talks at meetups, etc. And she has this line she'll often open up when she's talking about how competitions work. She says, how many of you have thousands and thousands of people scrutinizing your work very closely? I do. So it's definitely a tough role. Being a competition data scientist is a tough role because you're one person trying to find the vulnerabilities in the data set, and on the other end you've got sometimes many thousands of very determined, very smart people trying to attack the same data set. So they have a really difficult job. They do a really nice job of it.
Now, zooming out a bit, Kaggle has become the default home of data science. You have research coming out of Kaggle, machine learning frameworks coming out of Kaggle. Even during the initial days, Forbes had recognized your effort towards this. What keeps you going still? Because now it's the default home of data science. And what do you plan in the next few years for Kaggle and yourself?
I think a couple of different areas where I think we can do a lot better. I think that Kaggle is not as important. We are not, one of our big focuses in 2020 and beyond is becoming more and more important to data scientists' daily lives, right? So I think that we have the biggest positive impact on those who are very, very, very heavily engaged in Kaggle, but not everybody can compete in, I said to you, I competed in machine learning competition for recursion and I was exhausted by the end of it, right? It's very hard. Not everybody can can spend as much time on Kaggle as many of the grandmasters. And so, a lot of the benefit, I think there's tremendous benefits to spending a lot of time on Kaggle, but it's just not realistic for everybody. And so one of the things we want to achieve is make Kaggle more useful to more people who only are able to interact with the site in a lighter weight way. Or put differently, the way we frame the goal internally is we want the majority of the world's data scientists using Kaggle on a monthly basis. And that could be to reference notebooks that are written on problems that look very similar to problems they're tackling. So you never start with a blinking cursor, but you always start with somebody else's notebook as inspiration for a problem you're tackling. Let's say you're looking for public data, the first place you go to look is Kaggle datasets, right? So I think we're extremely valuable. I think we're very valuable to people who spend a tremendous amount of time on Kaggle. I'd like us to become a daily, weekly, monthly habit for not just those who are very active on Kaggle, but all the majority of the world's data scientists. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, my final question.
And maybe just to pause on that for a second, this is one thing I think Stack Overflow have really achieved. There's probably not a week or a month that goes by where a software engineer, and probably a machine learner as well, is not on Stack Overflow, right?
Yep.
That's something we have not yet achieved with Kaggle, and that's something I'd like us to reach for.
Got it. Now, my final question in this amazing conversation to you would be, what would be your best advice as the official head, if I may, of Kaggle to any new Kagglers or any novice Kagglers that are signing up today in 2020?
Yeah, I guess I feel somewhat unqualified to answer the question. You interview on this podcast far more talented people than me, but I guess one vantage point I have is I've seen a lot of people go through Kaggle and be very successful through Kaggle. And probably the best advice I have, the biggest trap that I think someone falls into is trying to do things too complicated, or and I think it's fine to start simple. Maybe you're tackling a binary prediction problem, and the first day you tackle that problem, you submit all ones. Okay, so it's not going to do very well, right? But
yep.
You're on the leaderboard. And maybe the next day you write an if then else statement, and you go from all ones to some improvement. And then the next day maybe you train even a linear logistic regression model in Excel. I don't know, just super simple. If you can make if you start very, very simple, and then work up to more and more complexity over time, you'll find that, and initially, don't worry about your leaderboard score. Just try and make an improvement every day. Every day you come back, you do a little bit better and a little bit better. I always say that between somebody who knows a bit of coding and a bit of statistics, and the cutting edge of machine learning is probably only about 6 months worth of work, right? And so if you can, it's not like there's a huge volume of things that you need to know. And so if you can have that goal of starting extremely simple and making a little improvement each day and a little improvement each day, after 180 days, you probably end up a very good machine learner. And so that's the number one advice. And the trap that I see people fall into is the converse of that. I'm not going to submit until I have something really good. I'm not going to submit until I have something really good. And that's a trap that I think a lot of people fall into, and they become discouraged because it's quite hard to, even the best Kagglers, very often are starting with very simple things. So start simple and build up and iterate, as opposed to waiting to submit until you have something very good. And the other message is that Kaggle is not only machine learning competitions. Some people find the concept intimidating, and there are other ways to learn as well. Datasets, now we have tasks on datasets. So if you're looking for a structured problem that isn't in a competition format, you can have a look at the tasks that other users have set out on datasets. Look for a data set that you find exciting or interesting, and read the kernels on it, and think about what problems might be interesting to tackle on that data set that other people haven't written a kernel on, and write that kernel. Oh no, sorry, I got to get used to calling them notebooks. Yeah, those are some of the ideas I have. But yeah, start simple and build up. Don't try and solve everything all at once.
Awesome. Before we conclude the interview, do you want to mention any platforms where we can follow you and your work? We'll have your Twitter handle linked in the description. Any other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I post publicly, it's only ever on Twitter. I'm a moderately active tweeter. It tends to come in bursts. I have time and I'll tweet something or respond on Twitter, and I'm busy and then I don't. So I wouldn't say I'm super active anywhere.
Okay.
But to the extent that I am, Twitter is probably the best place.
Okay, we'll have that linked in the description. Anthony, thank you again for doing this interview, and thank you so much for creating Kaggle for all of the data science community.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review, or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.